Hi! Welcome back, Fantasy Fiction Fanatics. It's great to see you again, and I hope you're doing well. So I know it's been quite a long time since I have put out a writing-oriented video, so today I'm going to be doing one. Sorry that it's been such a while. So all of you who are interested in writing fantasy fiction, this would be a class for you. Hopefully you enjoy it. Today we are going to be talking about magic. And I'd like to make sure we understand when I mean magic, I don't necessarily mean creatures. There are fantasies, stories that don't actually have any magic at all in them, and you're probably thinking like, that seems like a really tough thing to say. But what I mean by magic is like actually manifesting something happening, actually making something happen or exist that didn't previously exist through some kind of special ability or stuff like that. I don't necessarily mean like vampires. There are some stories that just have like vampires or werewolves or something like that and don't actually have magic. Though some vampires and those kind of stories do include magic, and vampires sometimes do have magic abilities depending on what the creator or the author's world works. But there's also several that don't. So, for example, Twilight has vampires and werewolves, and some of them have special abilities based on themselves becoming vampires, but that is not actually magic per se. It's not like they can wave their hands and a fireball will come out, like Fizbin with his spells and Raslin with his spells, or Harry where he has his wand and he can say incantation and something will happen. Or any other kind of story, or like not Banaras, I'm thinking of Vampire Academy. Those are vampires that also can use magic, because, and that's like a whole thing where vampires are actually living beings, not necessarily ones that are undead. So again, what I'm trying to talk specifically about today is magic, not necessarily magical creatures. So yes, some fantasy stories don't have magic, and that's okay if yours doesn't. But if yours does, this will be something that hopefully will help you in creating your magic in the world that you are creating. The main thing I'd like to say about magic is not a fix-all, end-all thing that can get you and your characters out of any scrapes. If you use magic in this way in your writing, I don't think you're going to be very successful in having a believable world and a believable storyline. Because if you use magic as an end-all, fix-all, there's going to be no point to having your plot, because magic will just be able to fix it. And there should have been no reason for this story to happen, only for at the very end for magic to have fixed everything, because then you could have just done that at the beginning. So it basically takes away your conflict, takes away anything that might be necessary to happen in your story, and that will be, for the reader, like their reading and the whole story is pointless, because everything could have happened in the first 5 pages of your novel. So I would really highly recommend you not using it as a way to fix everything, and not making it so you can just do whatever with magic. Again, that will just negate everything that you want to do with your story, because it will make it unbelievable. It'll make it like, okay, all of this just to end on this point. It will just make it seem like what's the point, really? And how is there any problems in a world that everything can be fixed with a snap of somebody's fingers? So, with that said, I feel like magic is the flip side of science, and has a lot of similarities to science as well. There are 5 things that I feel like science and magic both share in common. Number 1 is that there are rules. Number 2, there is reasoning behind the rules. It's consistent, learned often, not always. That one is one that's not 100% always true, I feel like, but it's often the case. And studied. So those 5 things I feel like magic and science really have in common, and we're going to go ahead and get into each one and some examples and things like that. But I feel like those 5 things are also very, very important. Just as it's important for science to have those 5 things, it's really important for magic to have those 5 things. Some of them can be a little bit optional, but a lot of them I feel like really, from what I've read, makes magic stand out and makes it really impactful is when it has those 5 things. The way that magic is not like science is that only a few can use it, usually. Obviously, it all depends on what kind of world you're going to create, but most stories have it where not every single person in the world can use magic. And it really depends on, sometimes it's based on birth, sometimes it's based on something happening to a character that then they can use it, that kind of stuff. Again, a lot of that is based on what kind of world you're creating, what kind of story you're creating, how your magic is going to work. But science in our real world, anybody can decide to study it and learn it and use it to their advantage, I guess you could say. Use it to further the human world, that kind of stuff. But in fantasy, more often than not everyone can use it, and only certain previous things that have happened to this character, either they're born that way, something particular happens to them that makes it so they gain these powers, whatever it is, they have to do something or have been born with something inside them in order to use it. It's not something that everybody can decide, hey, I want to learn to do magic, just like somebody in our world can decide, hey, I just want to learn science, I find it really interesting, I want to be able to use it and manipulate it and see what happens. Magic is not the case that way. It has to be particular people that can use it and wield it and do something with it. Alright, so now that we have the basics of magic down, let's go ahead and start with those 5 things. The rules is going to be the very first one we talk about. And rules are especially important with magic because, like I said earlier, is that we don't want it to be a end-all, fix-all, perfect solution to everything, because that's going to make our story not have a point and not have a conflict and wipe everything out. So rules are the best way to start with magic. That doesn't mean that you have to decide before you start writing, this is exactly 1, 2, 3, 4, how things work. That is not the case. Your writing style and how you develop things is going to be all on you. Can I say personally for myself, it helps me if I do that? Yes, when I'm writing, I prefer to have started with a little bit of a background on what I feel like I want to do or what I am inspired to have this world be like. So I have some kind of direction to go when I'm writing. If you don't work that way and you just want to write and see what comes of it and develop the rules as you go along, that is perfectly a-okay too, or any other kind of style of writing, whatever suits you best is completely fine. But it is important for you, I feel like, as a writer, to have the rules at some point established, at least in your brain. Either write it down somewhere or completely go over it in your brain, however works best for you so you can remember it, just so that way you know as you continue writing, once you've established what you want for this world and what you want the magic to be like. I think it's important for you as a writer to completely understand the rules that you're doing and somewhere have completely finalized them so that way you can continue writing and know what rules you're working with. What you've decided you can and cannot do, what can work and what can't work, who has magic, who doesn't have magic. All those things are really important for you to be able to remember what you need to have in mind as you keep writing and you keep making new scenes and new people, so that way you don't get confused and you don't make it inconsistent, which consistent is a topic we're going to talk about in a little bit. So, at some point, I recommend you really finalizing what you think your rules are going to be for magic and how exactly you can use it and who exactly can use it. So, some examples of magical rules is for Dragonlance. Every time a wizard uses magic, they forget the spell after they've used it. Or if they are in the middle of casting a spell and something interrupts them, that spell just goes right out of their head and they can no longer use it until they re-study their spell book and relearn the spell all over again. So this really puts a limit on magic users because they can only use the spell once until they study it again. They can't just keep casting the spell left and right and doing whatever they want with it. It's a one and done deal until they have time to rest and study it all over again. It also is kind of a pain because that means they always have to be studying their spell books. It's a full-time job. They can never have learned everything because once they've learned it and they've used it, they have to learn it all over again and it restarts the cycle. Or for example, with Harry Potter. I know in the movies it's not quite that way, but in the books I've always gotten the impression that other than some magic, you pretty much have to have a wand in order to work most spells. Obviously, like when Harry was at the zoo, he did make the glass disappear and the snake came out and everything like that, but for the most part you have to have a spell in order and to say some kind of words in order to make a specific thing that you want to have happen. So those are two examples of two stories with rules that the author has placed upon their characters and on the magic in order to make it believable and consistent and to make it so it's not a fix-all, end-all and negate everything that they are working toward. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to reasoning. Magic is really cool by itself. And because we have rules, we're setting up this world and how it works and everything like that, and the magic has things that need to be done in order to be active, in order for it to work. But if you really want to make your world complex and you really want to make the magic an extra dimension, to give it extra finesse, to give it some more sophistication for a more sophisticated audience, again, this also depends a little bit on what kind of book you're writing, whether you're doing an adult book, a kid's book, that kind of thing. That will change possibly how much of this you want to incorporate. But reasoning is really important behind the rules to give extra sophistication and to give extra finesse to the magic, make it more believable, make it more consistent, making it more everything, making it more bold, making it more interesting to the reader. There's a reasoning behind these rules. So obviously you're thinking, well, isn't it obvious? The rules are that they can do this stuff because that's the way it works. But if you have a fully developed magic, then there's reasonings behind why things work the way they do. Just like science, we say gravity exists. And so that's why we don't float off into space and we stay on the planet. But science is also deeper than that. They can say, hey, this is exactly how gravity works, and this is exactly why gravity is important, and this is exactly how gravity seems to exist. You know, it's a lot more than just gravity is there and so we don't float away. There's a lot more depth underneath it. Why does gravity exist? I'm not a scientist, so I will say I'm not an expert on that answer. But if you looked it up, I'm sure scientists have discovered this is what makes gravity be what it is. I mean, technically in this world we have a rule that sometimes the sun is up and sometimes the moon is up and the sun goes away. So, if we're going to go based on that versus daylight versus moonlight, it's because the reasoning behind that is the world is turning. So sometimes we have light and sometimes we don't because we are turning. That you might think, oh, well, that's just the way the world works, that's all a rule. But it's not, because the rule is just the basic baseline concept. We have day and night. That's the rule. There's no, sometimes we have days, sometimes we have nights, sometimes it's day and night in one day. Like, no, it's we have half, or not necessarily half. We have certain hours of daylight and we have certain hours of nighttime with the moon up. The reasoning behind that is because the world turns. So that all together is the way it works, but there's an explanation behind why there's day and why there's night, if that makes any sense. So reasoning, again, is just super important for sophistication and interest level for your readers. Now, like I said before, it also depends on whether you're writing an adult, kids, young adult, whatever it may be. You might have more of a sophistication or not. But I do say, for your own sanity and your own writing, whether you incorporate the reasoning into your book and actually put it on the page for your readers, it is my suggestion to you to actually plot your reasonings out, either on paper, in your head, whatever it may be, just like the rules, to have the reasoning established in your brain for yourself. So that way, no matter what's happening, you can plot your plot. You can plot your plot, or you can decide exactly how things are going to work out based on the reasonings that you have for yourself for the rules. So that way everything is straight in your brain and you can make it as believable as possible for your events, for your characters, for the way things are going to work. You'll have a solid background in your brain ready for you to know exactly what's going to happen and why that's happening. Whether you tell the reader or not, again, is up to you. It's just purely for yourself. You should at least have it in your brain somewhere that you can reference in order to make your story good. Some examples on the sophistication levels is, first, with Harry Potter, which, yes, even though a lot of adults, myself included, love Harry Potter, and it's not just for kids, it was originally written as a children's novel, so that might be part of the reason why it's a little bit lower of a sophistication. But, as I mentioned before with the rules, is that Harry in general and most wizards need a wand to work most specific spells. Obviously, they don't need to work all spells that way, especially when they're really emotional about it. But in general, to control their magic in order to create most spells and actually do something very specific with it, they need a wand. We don't actually know the reason why you need a wand to work magic. We don't know why they can do some magic without a wand and some magic with a wand. We don't know what exactly is the difference, especially when you're young and underage. You know, like the Harry making the glass disappear. How could he do that without a wand? If you generally need a wand in order to work magic, it's not very clear. I'm not saying necessarily that it's necessary for it to be clear. I'm just saying that that reasoning behind the wand versus not having a wand is not established to us as a reader. Now, I'm going to talk about a different Harry wizard, Harry Dresden. So, depending on a wizard's ability and how well they can focus their magic, magic is energy. So, because magic is energy and based on those abilities, Harry Dresden likes to use his blasting rod in order to focus his energy and his magic through the rod in order to have a more control over his magic. So we have a much more higher level of sophistication and reasoning behind the rules of him using his blasting rod versus not using his blasting rod. Technically, he doesn't need the blasting rod in order to work magic. But because of his own abilities and how if he just does magic it kind of goes a little wild, he chooses to use his blasting rod in order to focus the energy of his magic and do what he actually wants to do without blowing everything up. So as you can see, two different sophistication levels on magic, and it all depends on the detail of reasoning behind the rules, behind how it works, and giving us more detail about it. Okay, next is consistency, which you might think kind of explains itself, and it kind of does. So this one's one I don't think I'm gonna have to discuss too long, but consistency is just be consistent from page 1 to page whatever, when it says the end, you need to make sure that your rules and your reasoning are consistent the way your people in your book are using it. Again, don't turn it into a fix-all be-all. Don't make it where through 90% of the book it works fine, and then at the end suddenly something snaps and something changes and everything is fixed and the rules are out the water just so you can get yourself out of whatever plot you got yourself in and you can't get out of whatever conflict. That is not going to be a very good way of doing your magic, because it's going to completely negate everything that you just did, and readers are not going to believe it. Readers are going to wonder what happened, and it's going to feel fake. So just make sure from page 1 to page 300 or page 400 or whatever page you write till, when we get to the end, the very last page, all the way to the very last sentence, magic works according to the rules and the reasonings that you set at the beginning, or whatever you decided to set in the middle, whatever process you did. Make sure that everything flows the way it's supposed to with the same things. That again seemed pretty self-explanatory, right? All right, I know I've talked about quite a bit so far, and we're getting close to the end here. Only 2 more things to discuss. So if there's any comments, questions, concerns about what I've talked about so far, make sure to comment down below. Just want to make sure I don't lose anybody through the cracks if there's any questions or anything like that. So comment down below, or again, you can always comment and talk to me on Twitter. Okay, second to last thing is that magic is learned. Often, but not always. So I'm putting that little often but not always in because there are some stories that might have it where magic is instinctual, or whatever abilities are instinctual more than needing to be learned, like someone's just a natural at it. So it's not always the case that they have to learn magic, but more often than not, especially when we have the kind of underdog main characters or secondary characters that are closely related to the first main character, you have to learn more often than not how to use your magic. Just like Harry is going to school to learn some magic. So you have to decide what kind of characters you're making and decide what their abilities are going to be and how their magic is going to be for them. Is it going to be difficult? Is it going to need to be a struggle where you learn and you learn and you learn and it seems like you're never going to get anywhere, but you're finally building and being stronger? Or you're going to have that natural genius who's just like wakes up one day and is like, oh yeah, everything is great. Are you going to be a Hermione who studies before she comes to school and can do all sorts of magic? Just naturally learning the spell and she can just do it. Or are you going to have somebody who struggles? Or you're going to have somebody in between who's not necessarily the worst in the world, but doesn't have lots of natural talent and has to work hard in order to be amazing. Then all kind of this learning portion all depends on you and what character you created. And what kind of rules you've set in place that then makes it so they have to learn certain things or not learn certain things. This is the portion that's very much more based on creativity and your own personal choices. Some examples, like I said before, Harry Potter starts not even knowing about wizards or magic or anything, but he goes to the school to learn about it and he ends up being just fine. He ends up knowing how to do, not saying that he's a super gifted one like Hermione, but he ends up going to the school and being able to learn just fine how to do magic and ends up being a very smart wizard. And then I have Jim Butcher, who knows how to use his magic already in the story when we start. He already knows a lot about magic, but he did have to learn previously from Ebenezer, who took in charge of him. And before that, Justin Dumore, I believe this last name was, the wizard who had him after his father died and was teaching him magic. So he did have to learn. And even though he already knows how to use magic at the start of our story, he does continue to learn more about magic and the way of the world as we go through those stories. He has Bob the Skull, who is a knowledge spirit that lives in a skull, and whenever he doesn't know something about magic, he turns to Bob and says, "Hey, I don't know how this works. I don't know how to do this. I need your help," or whatnot. So he even is still learning, despite not being at a school, despite already being very knowledgeable about magic and the world. He still continues to learn. So these are two strong examples of learning and being able to have your characters learn, even if they already know what they're doing or if they don't know what they're doing. Okay, last but not least, studied. Magic a lot of times is studied, and you're probably like, well, what's the difference between learned and studied? Learned is actually learning yourself how to do something. Studied is more like what you would do with science, and the fact that you learn, basic math, basic science. But if you want to go further and you want to go in depth and you want to really learn how to make things tick, learn how to make things actually do things that you want to manipulate it to do that you're not sure how to do already, you study it. It's how you progress. So it's very linked to learned, but it's not the same thing as learned, especially because learned is specifically about the character who can do magic, learns how to do the magic. But studied does not necessarily require you to be able to do magic in order to study it. And there are several stories that have non-magic users know about magic and they study it to learn more about it, to know about it. And they're scholars that, for whatever reason, want to either know about magic to be able to defend themselves against it, to know about magic because they find it fascinating. Whatever reason, they study it and they know exactly how it works, but they can't use magic. And a lot of magic users also study magic to try and know it on a deeper level, to get into the places that people don't know, that you can't learn in schools, that you have to do through experimentation or not, just like science. So even though we know basic science, we know basic things about the universe, that kind of stuff, there are still scientists that are studying the world, that are studying the way things work and learning more and more and new advances for science. Magic is the same way. You might have a college or something, some kind of university or some kind of group or some kind of government or whatever else that studies magic, that goes more in depth with it, that tries really hard to dig deep and to learn even more and more that they didn't know, because it is constantly something that humans don't know everything about, or whatever creatures that use magic know everything about. And again, magic user versus non-magic user, both of them can study magic and try and figure out how it works. Just because they can't actually perform the magic doesn't dictate how they can study it and read books and to learn more in-depth things about it, or to have friends that are magic users that will help them with their thoughts and theses or whatever else. Some examples, as always, is Dragonlance. We have Raslin, who is studying magic, and he goes, now that we know that he goes to the library in Palanthas, and those are scholars that have magic user books there, and they're studying magic as well as other things, I believe. We don't know too much about what they're studying, but they are scholars that hold magic there, and they study the books and they keep them. And Raslin himself is trying to figure out how to do something specific in the last chapter that we saw him, and he's studying the magic to see how to do what he wants to do. My next example is Rain Banaras series. There are special schools that you go to to learn magic and things like that, especially if you're really powerful. And at those schools, they have scholars who work on experimenting in magic to keep trying to see what more they can do to see if they can make certain results happen, just like a science department would study and do experiments and all that kind of stuff. They, at one of the schools that is talked about in that series, is studying magic and trying to experiment and trying to do new things, especially when prodigies come to the school. They try and learn even more about these powerful magic users. Whew. So I'm a little out of breath. I try and talk so much and get all the information out. It's kind of hard to take a little breather. All right, so that's all the main things I wanted to cover about magic at this point. Obviously, as I get more through writing classes, we can discuss more in depth. Of course, any questions, comments, or concerns that you have can be left down below. And if it's a really big concern, of course, I will try to make a whole class dedicated to that concern if I can't solve it, and just chatting with you and learning together. If you have any ideas or thoughts or feelings about creating magic or about the kind of topics that I talked about today, I would love, love, love to hear about them from you so we can learn together. Of course, I don't know everything because writing is very much not one right way. So I would really, truly love to have a conversation with you to hear your thoughts and feelings on the matter and to learn more about how you think writing should be done, and maybe, I'll agree with you and we'll incorporate it together. So, yeah, go ahead and comment down below or on Twitter. I'm at fantasyfiction1 on Twitter. So go ahead and follow me if you'd like. I do post my videos come up, or I also post different things from authors, that kind of stuff up on that page. So go ahead and follow me there if you'd like, and comments, any questions, concerns, whatever you'd like on there, as well as the comments below. I hope you really enjoyed this class and got some stuff out of it. I know I enjoyed thinking about magic and different ways that I like to incorporate them, either through myself or writing or what else. It just happens in different books that I've read. So I guess I will see you for the next class. It will probably be another reading of Dragonlance. So I will see you then. Bye.